Welcome to everyone that's joining us and logging on this morning. We'll get started shortly. Good morning, everyone that's joining us. It's great to see so many of you logging on. We'll be getting started just in a few moments. Okay, I can see that people are still joining us, but it is just gone 10 o'clock, so let's get started. Welcome everyone to Greenspeaking with Confidence. I'm Donna Castle, Director of Communications at the ASA, and I'm delighted that so many of you have been able to join us this morning. We've got a packed agenda with some excellent speakers and panelists, which hopefully you can see on the screen just now. We are recording the session, so we can make it available afterwards to colleagues unable to join today. If you have any questions for the panel, please do type them into the Q&A box that you should be able to access at the bottom of your screens. Equally, if you have any technical problems with this Zoom webinar, please type them in the same place, as we have ASA colleagues on hand to try and help. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'm delighted to introduce our first speakers, ASA Chair David Curry, Lord Curry of Marylebone, and our Chief Executive Guy Parker, to tell you about the ASA's new 5-year strategy. Over to you, David.
Many thanks, Donna, and may I add my welcome to everybody who's joining this conference today. It's great to have so many participants. Before moving to the main theme of the morning, focusing on our green agenda, we're using the occasion to launch our new 5-year strategy, AI-assisted collective ad regulation, which Guy Parker, my Chief Executive, will summarize in a moment. But just a few quick introductory remarks from me. The ASA has made huge progress with its just-ending current strategy. We're highly proactive in our regulation, deploying AI with increasing range and power. We've trialed a world-first IPP pilot focused on platform and intermediary transparency and accountability. And we're in the global forefront of the regulation of green claims. Our new 5-year strategy recommits us to our purpose and ambition to ensure that every UK ad is responsible, sets out how we regulate and identifies the key drivers of our strategic decisions, breaking these down into 6 strands: people, planet, online, awareness and buy-in, collective ad regulation, and operational transformation. And it explains what success will look like. We believe that with this strategy, the next 5 years will see a very major transformation of the work of the ASA. We formulated the strategy with extensive fieldwork and inputs from many stakeholders, industry, other regulators, and consumer groups. And we're grateful for all their insights. And we'll be sharing the strategy with everyone registered for this event. So enough from me, over to Guy.
Thank you very much, David. Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for sparing some of your time this morning. We really appreciate it. I have got 6 minutes to tell you about a strategy that's taken us 8 months to create. You'll be relieved to hear I don't plan to talk through the 23 strategic decisions it contains. I'm going to be a bit more selective than that, but I am going to have to be quite pacey to get through even the highlights. And I want to start by saying that we're passionate about what we do, because we think responsible ads are good for people, good for society, and good for business. By making sure ads are responsible, we keep them legal, decent, honest, and truthful. We protect people from being misled, harmed, or offended, and we help them to feel more confident about the ads that they see and hear. And we know this from our research. Increased public awareness of the ASA and the work we do leads to increased public trust in the ASA, which in turn leads to increased public trust in ads. We're also striving to deliver a level playing field for advertisers and trusted media environments. And our partnering with other regulators is crucial too. Our frontline ad regulation often complements their activities. It even frees them up sometimes to entirely concentrate on their other duties. They can sometimes take action when we can't. And of course, we already co-regulate broadcast, video on demand, and video sharing platform ads with Ofcom. So our strategic decisions put people first, prioritizing protecting vulnerable people in particular. And don't forget, vulnerability can be shared characteristics, vulnerability can be situational, and in a way, we're all vulnerable to climate change. We can only do that if we employ the best people from diverse backgrounds. And diverse doesn't just mean to us protected characteristics, but also diversity of thought, which is why we're committing to widening the geographical distribution of our workforce. Given the title of this event, it won't surprise you to hear that we're recommitting to continuing our climate change and the environment project throughout the strategy period. We'll continue to focus on misleading green claims, given the potential for people to be misled as the UK transitions to net zero, for example, in advertising related to greener homes. We want to deliver our regulation to support the rapid and lasting change towards more sustainable business that the UK needs. We'll focus on the content and targeting of ads for products and services that can lawfully be advertised. It's for elected politicians to consider calls for category ad bans. We will continue to regulate all forms of online advertising that we cover using our active ad monitoring system. And I want to just tell you a little bit more about that. This system captures online ads and uses machine learning models that we've built and deployed in high priority areas to classify ads as likely acceptable or not, although always with human experts taking the final decision. It's absolutely key to us meeting the scale challenge of regulating online ads. It's up and running already. We're on course to process 3 million ads through the system this year. Most of them are fine, of course, but some are not. We've got more work to do. There are gaps in our coverage, and we plan to scale it up further. I predict that we will process at least 10 million ads through it next year. It'll continue to contribute to us taking down more irresponsible ads that cause high detriment. And importantly, it will also help us shed a brighter light on areas of high compliance too, including following our intervention. We'll be complementing that use of AI by championing, on the back of the IPP pilot that David mentioned, how we think our regulatory framework needs to develop to help meet the challenges we face in regulating online ads, bringing greater transparency and broader accountability to the role that online platforms and intermediaries play. We'll be advocating for an IPP version 2 that is permanent, comprehensive, and effective. We'll continue to play our part in supporting enforcement authorities and businesses in the online ad supply chain to tackle the scourge that is consumer fraud involving online ads. That's also the focus of activity under the government's fraud strategy. And we will be authoritative and influential in online ad regulation, including in relation to data-driven advertising and the opportunities and risks presented by Gen AI. The last 3 strands include us being ambitious in increasing public opinion former and industry awareness of and trust in the nature and extent of our regulation in all media. We want to be more widely known as the frontline regulator of UK ads. We want to continue to be authoritative and influential on ad regulation and the centre of expertise. Some of our targets in this area prompted a public awareness of the ASA of 70% plus, trust in the ASA of 60% plus, and distrust in the ASA of 6% or less. We are big believers in our strategies containing scary commitments, and this is one of them. I talked earlier about working with industry and working with other regulators. We call that collective ad regulation. We'll continue to make the case for it to politicians and officials, but we'll also work with governments and statutory regulators to explore and, as necessary, address any material gaps in our regulation that we find, always stressing the importance of targeted and proportionate regulation that allows responsible advertising to thrive. And on the operational transformation front, we'll prioritise proactive regulatory projects, adopting a whole system approach to ad-related issues that cause the most detriment to people, as well as green claims. Expect that to focus on protecting vulnerable people, on age-restricted ads in sectors like food, gambling and alcohol, and on issues that are more specific to people in the nations and regions. Will ensure we invest more in our preventative and proactive work than our reactive complaints casework. Will resolve investigations quicker, focus on preventing irresponsible ads appearing in the first place. And finally, we'll deliver ongoing agile and visible enforcement, including through enforcement mechanisms developed with platforms and intermediaries. Thank you. Back to you, Donna.
Thank you very much, Guy and David. I'm sure everyone will agree that we've got some exciting work ahead of us. So picking up on the planet strand of our new strategy and the main theme of this morning's event, I'm delighted to introduce my ASA colleagues, Miles Lockwood and Justine Grimley, who lead our climate change and the environment project. Over to you.
Well, good morning, everyone. We're really excited about this opportunity today to share time with you all on this topic of climate change and the environment. Justine and I want to kick this part of the session off by outlining the wider context for the ASA's work in this area and to reflect on why we think it's time to move beyond the greenwashing versus green hushing debate. Now, as you've already heard one of the 6 strands of our new 5-year strategy commits us to placing issues related to the planet as one of our key priorities. That strategic decision signals the importance of this issue to us and by extension, of course, to the advertising industry. And it should come as no surprise. Humanity is, of course, facing many intractable conflicts and challenges, as we see playing out in the news on a daily basis. But I think few would argue against the view that the crisis facing our climate and environment is the biggest, most enduring and most complex global challenge that we and the generations that follow us will still be tackling for decades to come. It's the urgency and magnitude of this crisis that's leading legislators in the UK and abroad to set ambitious net zero targets, to plan for the phasing out of the purchase of high carbon and otherwise polluting goods and services, and to increasingly seek to nudge or direct consumers towards more sustainable purchasing and lifestyle decisions. It's this pressure and concern that's also beginning to lead some jurisdictions, from nation state to local authority levels, to introduce content and placement restrictions or bans on ads for products and services that are perceived to be damaging in environmental terms. So as the implications of these coming changes to lifestyles and practices become ever more real and urgent for consumers, the focus is increasingly shifting onto the role that businesses play, for good or ill, through their advertising in this transition. Advertising is, of course, only one piece of the puzzle when it comes to enabling the changes that will help the UK achieve its net zero and other targets. But if harnessed, advertising is bestowed with a unique, intangible power to play a positive role over the next few years. In short, we think advertising has a window of opportunity to emerge from this period as one of the heroes in helping consumers to adapt in the face of the climate emergency. That's why it's never been more important that in the future, when people take a step back and reflect on advertising and its overall relationship with the environment, that they will perceive it to be on the side of positive change, to be environmentally legal, decent, honest, and truthful. And that's where we come in. The ASA has, of course, been regulating misleading and socially irresponsible green claims for many decades, long before it was a priority for others. But recognising the urgency of the challenge, we've been making significant proactive interventions on it since 2021, and our work will continue in the coming years. Those proactive interventions are being deliberately targeted at sectors and issues which the UK Climate Change Committee has identified to government as being the critical priority areas for consumer behaviour change and carbon reduction that are necessary for the UK to meet its net zero targets. This is why over the last couple of years, we've carried out proactive investigations of green claims being made by energy companies and financial institutions that bankroll them and other high carbon industries. It explains our ongoing artificial intelligence assisted monitoring, investigation, and in preparation enforcement plans for priority high carbon sectors, including airlines making sustainable flying claims. It provides the context for our research into consumer understanding of carbon neutral and net zero claims and ads, and our research and current investigations into electric and hybrid vehicle claims. It also contextualises why we're working in close partnership with department governments such as the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero on carbon neutrality issues, DEFRA and other partners on environmental food labelling, with the Financial Conduct Authority and the Competition and Markets Authority on a host of shared regulatory environmental priorities and inquiries, including green finance, fast fashion, fast-moving consumer goods, and home heating and insulation. It's why we'll be publishing new consumer research into consumer perceptions of meat, dairy, and plant-based food claims in ads in March 2024. And when my colleague Cam speaks later on in the session, it will show why we're now also turning our attention to green disposal claims in ads. And with that, thank you for listening. I'll hand over to Justine.
Thanks very much, Miles. Well, in all of our work over the last few years, it's been very clear to us that most businesses are seeking to do the right thing. Businesses clearly and understandably want to tap into green markets, and as Miles noted, this is a good thing for the consumer to help them make greener choices. The ASA supports that and recognises the role that we play in enabling a level playing field for businesses to take advantage of those markets when making green ad claims. But we also recognise that if you're on the receiving end of an ASA ruling, sometimes the implications can seem daunting. And we've seen some of those concerns play out over the summer in the debate about whether businesses have a choice only between greenwashing or green hushing. And we understand these concerns, but we think the way forward for business is to embrace the challenge. It's certainly the case that the underlying science and terminology of green claims can sometimes be complex or contested or unclear. For instance, some products may have elements in a long international supply chain where environmental life cycle information is required. And recognising this complexity and acting accordingly is therefore essential. But more often than not, the problems that we find in ads have much simpler solutions than you might think. Problems arise far too often from businesses who make the mistake of being too broad brush, too generalised, too vague, too bombastic, or too poorly evidenced in their claims. In many of the circumstances that we've banned ads, the claims would have been okay had a slightly more cautious approach been taken. So more precision, more limited claims, better qualified claims, and claims that are more realistic about where a business is along its sustainability journey are far less likely to fall foul of the ASA's rules. And as our own and other research tells us time and time again, are also seen to be much more credible and therefore likely to be trusted by the end consumer. Businesses also frequently fail to take account of what the consumer is likely to know or understand from a claim. Our research shows that reasonably observant consumers have high interest and high expectations of brands making green claims, but generally low levels of understanding of what lies behind green issues. Those reasonably observant consumers often make assumptions about green claims that are not correct, or as you might expect, as our new research on green disposal claims will demonstrate later in this session. So it's really important, therefore, to walk a mile in the shoes of a consumer when constructing your green claim, and don't assume that your intentions of how a claim will be understood will be seen in the same way by them. In the case of high carbon sectors like oil and gas, finance, energy supply, and high carbon transport, the reality is that we've called time on big, broad brush, green halo claims that talk up the greenness of an overall business model, where those green activities form only a small part of the overall picture. Ads are now required to add balance about how significant green activities are compared to the high carbon activities of the business. And we've taken this tough line because in a world where consumers want to make greener choices and where policymakers and legislators are tightening up and where businesses are competing fiercely on the green agenda, clarity around green plans and initiatives is critical. The advertising of high carbon sectors is increasingly in the spotlight, and calls are growing in some quarters for outright category ad bans for high carbon products and services. It's vital, therefore, that we enforce high standards in these high risk areas. But even in these sectors, the choice can't and doesn't need to be between, on the one hand, making misleading claims, or on the other, not making claims at all, which is what the greenwashing versus greenhushing debate effectively oversimplifies things to. That outcome would amount to an abdication of responsibility and leadership, given the important role that advertising can play in education and awareness. Even in these most challenging of environmental creative ad contexts, we're convinced that there is a way for business to navigate our new standards. Since our rulings concerning banks and energy companies, we've been really pleased to see some companies in these high carbon businesses adapting by putting out ads that give a more honest, accurate, and therefore informative account of where that company is along its sustainability journey. Those ads now tell a story in a few simple words and images that gives the consumer a balanced view of how significant those green initiatives and plans are, and in doing so, engage consumers so that they can make more informed choices. And as our research has proven, that more realistic and honest conversation is liked, respected, and trusted by the consumer. So, if a high carbon emitting business like an energy company or a bank can get it right, we think any company in any sector can get it right, as long as they apply themselves to the caution, care, authenticity, and realism that I've outlined here today. And it'll be those businesses who step up and grapple with the detail and complexity of making green claims. Those businesses that engage consumers in a frank conversation with the journey that needs to be travelled by both business and consumer in the green transition. Those businesses who take the advice on offer both from us through our advertising guidance, copy advice, and e-learning services, and the advice of fellow regulators such as the Competition and Markets Authority. They will be the businesses who reap the rewards of being seen as the go-to brands, the thought leaders, and the advertising heroes of the green transition. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Justine, and Miles as well. I don't think it's exaggerating, although I would say that our work is truly world-leading in this area. I'm now delighted to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. Welcome to Alex Sobel, MP for Leeds North West and Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Net Zero. Alex, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks very much. I'm just finding my notes. Just give me a second. I had them and now I cannot find them again. There we go. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Sobel. I'm the chair of the Net Zero APPG in Parliament, working cross-party to make the case for urgent government action to secure a low-carbon future for the UK. I'm also the former Shadow Minister for Nature. Thank you to the ASA for having me, and particularly Kate and Donna. Thank you to everyone in the audience for joining and being part of the journey. Today, I'm going to focus on the importance of the advertising industry in the transition to net zero. Advertising has a foundational role to play when it comes to our societal transition. This is due to its role in constructing narratives about culture and society, and its role in driving consumption and consumer behaviours. The message that myself and the APPG are keen to give is that innovation and changes that we can make in advertising will be instrumental in other areas and securing net zero across the board. It is not a given that the advertising industry will be automatically beneficial to reaching net zero targets. There has often in the past been an inherent conflict between advertising and corporate responsibility. Instead of seeing these necessary innovations as obstacles, all stakeholders, including the government, advertising industry and regulators, needs to work together to benefit from the opening presented by the consumer market. The UK possesses 11.7 billion advertising export industry with unique, strategic, creative and technical strategy. We need to harness this power now to address the existential issue of the climate emergency. We know that greenwashing is used to cover up harm that's being waged on the environment, not simply fake climate action taken by companies. We can see through numerous campaigns ASA have held to account, for instance, HSBC, Shell and Etihad Airways. Time and time again, as highlighted by the ASA's research, a lack of consumer understanding in terms such as carbon neutral and carbon offsetting is exploited. Human statistics are seen to be untrustworthy in case of carbon offsetting. For example, a good recent example is the Vera carbon standard used by Disney, Gucci and Shell was found to be absolutely meaningless. Research found that at least 90% of Vera's carbon credits have no benefit to the climate, which is why I strongly believe in regulation of carbon offsetting and have standards across the board, not just in the UK, internationally. Greenwashing has done real damage to public trust, and this trust must be earned back. Net zero is a capital-intensive process that requires effective communication and partnership between all stakeholders across Westminster, Whitehall, local government, and of course the private sector. What we are witnessing is a lack of coherence in green communications. Advertisers have responsibility, but so does the government. The lack of standardisation of climate messaging, and as a result, climate and overall net strategy is felt by consumers and does send a confusing message. The last major government communication campaign about climate change and the environment was the Act on CO2 campaign, launched on 27th November 2008. So 15 years, pretty much exactly to yesterday, since we last had a government campaign. In our Net Zero APPG report, which sets out a net zero roadmap, we state the importance of establishing a strategic communications programme championed by a cross-departmental group of ministers. Currently, this doesn't exist. Having coordinated communication action at all levels of central, regional and local government will help to encourage and maintain public support. You can read more about this in the Net Zero All-Party Parliamentary Group roadmap on our website, netzeroappg.org.uk. A really good example of this in practice is the government communications around the COVID-19 virus and lockdown, although that may have taken a slight hit recently with the COVID-19 inquiry. But the fact is, daily briefings on national television provided data about the spread of COVID-19 are often delivered by the Prime Minister himself, the Chief Medical Officer and the Government Chief Scientific Advisor, and those scientists gave public trust to the messages that were given. Matt Bourne, the Advertising Association, emphasised the importance of learning from the government's COVID-19 communications, describing the pandemic as the best example of, essentially, mass behaviour change rapidly in a crisis. We need to model that and replicate it for the climate crisis. Highlights that government-led communication in the pandemic had on businesses, suggesting brands saw the leadership's come from government and then reinforce it through their own advertising. The recommendation made to enhance climate communications is easy to be clearly laid out for the government and for advertisers alike. An example is the growing call for certain terms to be abandoned, such as green economy, green energy, and climate change being a big one. Those calling for terms to be disused do so because they claim these phrases can numb people with fear or simply downplay the emergency. It's recommended that climate messaging uses positive and practical language. It's also found that local messaging is extremely effective, again, pointing back towards this coordinated response that the APPG is seeking. The Welsh Government has co-produced climate communication with local groups in this vein as a way of making sure that things are relevant to everyone. In this way, the ASA's research has contributed to governmental review into the terms including net zero is welcome. This ASA's research in partnership with the Department for Energy and Net Zero and the CMA is currently looking into when, how, and what sort of carbon offsets should be used. This kind of joint work between the government and advertising industry demonstrates exactly the crucial role the latter plays in our societal transition to net zero. The lack of coherence in climate communications and messaging not only means businesses and advertisers feel less confident promoting green initiatives or promoting their environmental credentials. It means that consumers feel overwhelmed with conflicting information, which, as the ASA have stated, contributes to individuals giving up trying to source sustainable products altogether and feeling powerless to affect any change. A key recommendation in many research reports is, as the ASA suggests, that all stakeholders, including the government and agencies, need to use standardised terms to avoid misleading people. This will contribute to comprehensive messaging on the climate crisis in both the government and private sector. An interesting point to consider when it comes to establishing climate communications is who decides what language or imagery is used in messaging. It's not just language that makes the role advertising play in the transition to net zero so important going forward. We also need to conduct more research across government and the private sector into the visual language advertising, the road to net zero. Research shows that visual cues such as nature images and the colour green contribute to positive emotional responses and motivate consumers to automatically perceive these products as environmentally friendly. In this regard, more research is needed into the aesthetics of climate communications and how to make sure that these are being used ethically and responsibly by agencies. In the APPG's Net Zero Myth-Busting report, we highlighted the need for everyone to rethink their relationship with stuff, with things, with consumption. We need to consume less, refill, repair, and reuse more. If we are to meet our net zero goal, we must encourage consumers to go beyond just buying more sustainable or environmentally friendly products. This doesn't mean going without. Rather, we need to rethink consumerism. This change in behaviour will only be achieved with the support of the advertising industry. 2021-22, the House of Lords Environment and Climate Change Committee conducted an inquiry into mobilising action on climate change and environment through behaviour change. Key example of this dedicated balance between government policy and industry innovation is evidence submitted to the Lords report. It notes that TV ad spend on the promotion of hybrid electric and alternative cars was from 8% share in 2018 to 70% in 2021, after the government's announcement to end the sale of petrol and diesel cars by 2030. Unfortunately, this target has now been moved back to 2035, although Labour's policy is tradition. On the other side, evidence submitted by active travel charity Sustrans also points to negative power advertising, highlight that research illustrates that the advertising of SUVs is rapidly increasing sales and market shares of larger, more polluting SUVs, which is jeopardising climate goals in the UK and worldwide. This need to change consumer behaviour must come from the government. If we're asking advertisers to work towards changes, we must provide clear guidelines for regulators. In more material terms, there are also emissions associated with the advertising industry. The Advertising Association's Climate Action Work Group has published a report with Credos, in which it estimates total UK agency operational CO2 emissions are going to exceed 84,000 tonnes a year. Credos estimates 42% of that comes from energy usage and 58% from business travel, with the biggest single contribution coming from flights. It's great that today we're all working here in this method of virtual conference, which obviously reduces the need for flights. Net Zero APPG is keen to support official partnerships between industry and government as a key to providing a succinct, clear public messaging about net zero. We need to ensure companies who market products and services associated with lower greenhouse gas emissions and environmental impacts can compete fairly. It is built into Labour's net zero strategy to work with business, the advertising industry being a key agent in this. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Alex. And we were delighted you were able to join us this morning. It's great to hear all of those insights from you about what's going on in Parliament and government. So thank you very much indeed. It's now time for our final speaker before the panel session this morning. Our research specialist, Cam Atwell, is here to share the results of our new consumer research into people's understanding of green disposal claims. Cam.
Thank you, Donna, and good morning, everyone. I'll just wait for the slides to pop up. So I'll be taking you through the findings of our qualitative study carried out by Jigsaw Research on our behalf, which looks at green disposal claims in ads and consumer understanding of the terms recycled, recyclable, compostable, and biodegradable. The key objectives of the research were to investigate consumer understanding of the claims made in ads, how understanding of the terms used is dependent on the context of the ad or product sector, and if and how this understanding influences purchasing decisions. 30 in-depth interviews were conducted with a sample of participants spread by age, gender, life stage, locations across the 4 nations, and with varying levels of engagement with climate change. Interviews were designed to investigate consumer understanding of the different claims within the context of specific ads, and we used over 20 ads as stimulus material covering a range of media, sectors, and creative styles. Looking firstly at attitudes to climate change more generally, we found that most participants accepted climate change as a fact, although few claimed to engage with the topic in any particular detail. Responsibility for tackling climate change was seen as one shared by all, from consumers to business, and big business in particular, with leadership expected from government and international bodies. And most participants across the engagement spectrum felt they contributed towards tackling climate change and were proud of their efforts. When thinking about environmental claims in ads, there was uncritical acceptance of them. Participants believed ads were regulated, so they assumed brands were unable to make environmental claims without evidence or verification, particularly if they included facts or used more technical terms. A minority were more questioning of claims, including those more engaged with the topic and more sensitive to potential cases of greenwashing, and those who generally lacked trust in big corporations and claims they made in any context, not just in ads. Green disposal management was seen as a way for consumers to do their bit and was mainly engaged with at the point of disposal rather than point of purchase. This was partly due to assumptions around disposal, such as being able to put cardboard in home recycling bins, regardless of any explicit claims made, and assumptions that businesses would make the most ethical choices possible with regards to materials used. Engagement with waste management, usually in the form of recycling, tended to be limited to home disposal, and participants held strong faith in the waste management system, confident that if they put something in the right bin, someone would take care of the necessary technical processes. Most were resistant where there was a requirement to travel outside the home for a product to be disposed of properly. Additional requirements were treated not just as an inconvenience, but as a breaking of an unspoken agreement where brands played their part by making waste seamlessly disposable, and consumers played theirs by disposing of the product responsibly at home. It was felt that placing extra burden on the consumer was seen to complicate what was otherwise a simple process and could lead to criticism of the brand, particularly if the requirement was not clearly communicated, leading to anger or even disengagement from the whole process. Use of green disposal terms in ads seemed like a good idea, and participants felt brands were being truthful and transparent in using them. There was general blind acceptance of what advertisers claimed, particularly smaller, lesser-known brands, who were often assumed to hold a genuine environmental ethos, which could risk consumers having an oversimplified understanding of the terms and processes, and providing a sense the issue was being dealt with without engaging with the complexities. There was a general assumption that responsible green disposal was possible from the home, and use of these words in ads was assumed to imply that, unless clearly stated otherwise. And it was felt that if disposal involved activities outside the home, then not only should that be made clear, but government and business were responsible for making services as accessible as possible. We're looking at spontaneous understanding of the terms recyclable and recycled. Those two terms were the most familiar and easy to describe. While there was low awareness of the stages of the recycling processes, participants presume most packaging and products were created to be recyclable these days. The terms compostable and biodegradable were less well understood and often confused with one another. Both were assumed to be natural and benign processes, but participants found it difficult to define each term and often made oversimplified assumptions about how such products could be disposed of, particularly as it wasn't something they engaged with in the same way as recycling. Some more engaged participants referenced home compost bins and heaps and had an awareness of the associated limitations. Biodegradable was hardest to define, with participants often using assumptions as a reference point to come up with a definition. For example, applying the idea of fruit biodegrading naturally in a field to suggest that products such as a biodegradable credit card used in a stimulus material would decompose in the same way, when in actual fact, the additional information on the brand's website explains a complete deconstruction of the product is required, including cutting out the chip and magnetic strip and chopping up the card to protect personal details before putting it in either the food waste or standard rubbish bin. We worked with an expert in the field to compile definitions of the four terms, including some of the conditions necessary for effective disposal in each case. Exposure to these led to a variety of reactions, ranging from surprise and disbelief to frustration. Views towards brands using the terms recyclable and recycled didn't change significantly when definitions were shared. While some felt the additional detail, such as disposal location, was interesting, it wasn't felt to impact how brands can and should use the terms in ads. Understanding the complexities behind the terms compostable and biodegradable provoked stronger reactions of confusion, frustration, and even anger, with some participants concerned that the terms were misleading without sufficient qualification. For compostable, this concern came when a product's disposal required specific conditions. Compared with the definition of biodegradable, there was some reassurance to learn there were defined timescales when describing a product as compostable. However, for some participants, it was concerning to learn about the potential for contamination of recycling bins with the addition of non-recyclable items such as compostable plastics. With regards to the term biodegradable, the unlimited timeframe, the fact that any product could be described as biodegradable, and the potential for toxin creation was both shocking and disappointing. There was a feeling that the definition undermined any positive associations with the term, potentially causing more harm than good and misleading consumers to feel they'd done something positive. There was a strong belief that without significant qualification, the term should not be used, and some even argued it shouldn't be used at all. Participant motivation relied on the belief that their actions made a difference to combating climate change. So it was potentially demotivating for participants to hear that these terms were more complex and that their current behaviours were possibly not as meaningful as they'd hoped. After seeing the definitions, most participants felt strongly that there should be stronger rules around their use in ads, with suggestions including the requirement for brands to use more specific wording, such as home compostable or industrially compostable, to emphasise the complexities involved. In conclusion, the research revealed 4 key areas where participants were looking for clear and prominently communicated information. Participants wanted clearer information on which parts of a product were or were not recyclable, compostable, or biodegradable, which they felt was particularly important for avoiding contamination. They wanted to know where the product should be disposed of, as this was crucial to whether they felt they could take the right action. Home disposal was more appealing and likely to be more effectively followed up on than disposal that required travel. As mentioned, it was felt to be unrealistic to rely on consumers to take on the burden for the brand's claims to be true. They felt it was important to know how long a product would take to break down when claims said they are compostable or biodegradable, and without this information, claims were considered misleading. If a product was likely to take a long time to fully break down, the claim felt less powerful and raised greater suspicions over the brand's motivations. And finally, they were looking for transparency about disposal processes, particularly with regards to biodegradability and a requirement to declare if a product has the potential to create harmful byproducts. Overall, participants appreciated the complexity involved with communicating such details, suggesting brands should consider taking a holistic approach across packaging, in ads, and on their websites. It was felt important that any additional information should strike the right balance between greater accuracy and ensuring continued motivation without impacting creativity in ads or risking possible disengagement from the disposal process that could come with increased knowledge. In terms of next steps, along with our research report, we've also published updated guidance in this area today. The guidance addresses changes flowing from our findings, and between now and April of next year, we're inviting businesses to consider how their marketing claims will need to adapt to take account of these findings and the new guidance. From April 2024, we will monitor green disposal claims and will at that point begin to proactively investigate claims that may be misleadingly omitting materially important end-of-use disposal information, claims that suggest an item can be recyclable, compostable, and biodegradable, and claims where substantiation evidence to back claims may be lacking. In the meantime, from January, we'll be taking enforcement action against claims where the ASA has already established existing positions on claims, such as 100% recyclable, where the item is not 100% recyclable. And finally, we'll continue to work in partnership with DEFRA on issues concerning disposable wipes and with the Competition Markets Authority on fast fashion. So that's a quick summary of our key findings. You can find the full research report and the guidance on our website today. Thank you, and I'll now hand back over to Donna.
Thank you very much, Cam, for sharing those really interesting research results with us. I can see that a number of you have been typing your questions into the Q&A box. Please continue to do so, as I'm delighted now to introduce you to our expert panel. We're joined by Cecilia Parker-Arana from the Competitions and Markets Authority, Paul Wilson from the Federation of Small Businesses, Harriet Kingerby from the Conscious Advertising Network, and back with us, Guy Parker, ASA Chief Executive. So it's my pleasure to hand over to our moderator for this final session, journalist and broadcaster, Lucy Siegel.
Thanks, Donna. Hello, everybody, and welcome to my brilliant panel. Yes, I've been watching the questions flood in. Keep them coming. There's some really good ones in there. And thank you to all the speakers so far. We've had a lot of information, I think, and we've covered quite a few different areas. So I guess we're going to kind of pick up and delve a bit deeper into that. And we're introducing some other voices with some other constituencies, which will be really interesting to hear what they make of this as well. I'll introduce you to the panel just by way of introduction. As Donna said, I'm a journalist and broadcaster. I have actually covered greenwash and I don't like calling people consumers. I'm just going to be upfront with you. Citizens with agency. Okay, consumers, we all consume. And I have talked to I work for the One Show on BBC One, which is a very mainstream tea time programme. I've talked to our viewers about greenwashing over the years. So it's been very interesting to me to hear the actual research from this morning and how this is crystallising. So let me introduce you to our panel. Just wave when I mention your name, if you don't mind. So Guy Parker, you've met already, Chief Executive of the ASA, which is, of course, the UK regulator of ads in all media. Guy, you've been there since 2009. You've seen a lot of regulation, so I'm going to really enjoy your perspective. Cecilia Parker-Arana, who you've also met today, Director of Consumer Protection at the Competition and Markets Authority since 2014. So Cecilia's led development of the CMA's Green Claims Code, is Director for CMA's investigations into environmental claims, and has contributed to government work on the relationship between the consumer, citizen, protection law framework and environmental sustainability. She knows everything there is to know. Good morning to you. Not much hype there. And Paul Wilson, hello to you. Paul is the Policy Director at the Federation of Small Businesses, which is, of course, the voice for the UK's 5.5 million small businesses and the self-employed, of which I'm one. Thank you, Paul. And yes, this is a voice that we haven't really heard represented yet this morning. So yeah, we've got lots of questions for you. And Harriet Kingerby, hello to you, an activist working at the intersection of advertising, climate change and misinformation. Those are very strong pillars. And of course, the co-founder of the Conscious Advertising Network, which has 150 plus members and growing. And some of those are pretty big. So thank you so much. Let's dive right in. So we're going to talk green speak, greenwashing, green hushing, and how to survive them, essentially. I've got a bespoke sort of question for each of you first, then we'll broaden out into a wider discussion, if that's okay. And hopefully we've got time for some audience questions as well. So let me just have a quick look. Where did I want to start? So Guy, coming to you first. You know, we know now from this morning, if we didn't know before, that the environment is clearly intended as a key part of the new SA strategy. A few years ago, it would have been considered, well, I would imagine, on the margins of your mandate. How has it become so core, and where does your scope begin and end?
Thank you, Lucy. I've been at the ASA since 1992, by the way. But I've been in my current job since 2009. I know I'm a lifer. And because I've been here so long, I know that we've been looking at green claims, misleading green claims for decades. So we've been in the game for a long, long time. But obviously things are a lot more focused on climate change now. The UK, like most Western nations, has committed to ambitious, legally binding net zero targets. And we know from expert bodies like the UK Climate Change Committee that changes to our energy grid ain't going to get us there on their own. We need wide-scale consumer behavior change to hit them. Advertising superpowers include helping us to choose products and services, of course, but also establishing or evolving behavioral norms. On the first of those, trust is absolutely essential. Green claims need to be deserving of our trust, or people will dismiss them as greenwashing. On the second of them, the behavior change one, advertising's got an increasingly big role to play here. As the anti-consumption agenda grows. And we're seeing that happen now, and it's only going to become more mainstream. And really, to put it very simply, advertising needs to be net on the side of the angels in encouraging people to behave more, not less sustainable. So that's a really interesting role for advertising going forward, and ad regulation comes into that too.
Fascinating. I'm just going to throw in just a question here, because I saw it in the Q&A box before and I thought it was very interesting. So you are very, I mean, this is, it's a very strong line you're taking. You're saying, advertising needs to be on the side of the angels. We've already heard about your work with the Climate Change Committee and stuff like that. So we've had a recent, someone just brought this up in the chat box, had a recent pushback from an investor regarding Unilever about virtue signalling. I think Fundsmith, Terry Smith, I think took exception to woke mayonnaise or something like that. I mean, it's not universally applauded that advertising should take this role. Do you get much pushback, and how do you justify the stance that you're taking?
I think that pushback was more about purpose in marketing, and the feeling that some people have that not every brand needs a purpose. What we're talking about here is a bit different. I think pretty well every brand, pretty well every advertiser needs to think about sustainability. The public are going to be expecting more from brands in terms of becoming more sustainable, and businesses are going to be investing in sustainability initiatives, and they're all on their own decarbonisation journey too, and they're going to want to talk about it, and they've got to talk about it. But there's a balance to be struck in how they talk about it. As Miles said earlier, we don't want the regulation that we deliver in this area to have a chilling effect on businesses' appetite for talking about their more sustainable initiatives. That would be a bad thing. We do not want that. We're big believers that there's actually a big space to play between greenwashing and green hushing, but it requires a lot of thought and attention, and it requires businesses to invest in learning more about what the pitfalls are in this area. And it also requires them to wean themselves off, and I'm not speaking for all businesses here, I'm speaking for some, to wean themselves off the habit of these big broad brush, good for the planet type claims, which research shows consumers are more suspicious about anyway, because they kind of smell a bit of greenwashing.
Right. Okay. So we're not going to get any sort of virtue signaling codes of conduct coming your way. So it comes back also almost to the precision and the tightness of the descriptions as well, which we will talk about. Thank you very much for that. So Cecilia, I want to come to you. What are the key things businesses can do to get their green claims right? Let's start with a brief, clear outline, if that's okay.
Well, we've touched on a few of those things already, and I think you'll see that the CAP codes and the rules set out by the Advertising Standards Authority are very well aligned with the CMA's own Green Claims Code, which is 6 principles that businesses have to follow. And if you've not looked at them, I would urge everyone to go away and look at those. But I'll highlight just a few things. I would say the first thing is don't let the tail wag the dog. This should be about transitioning your business to a sustainable model rather than about shouting about how green you are to consumers. And if you start with getting things right within your company, communicating to consumers becomes that much easier, because you then have the evidence to back up what you're saying. Having the evidence is really crucial. Don't come up with a clever marketing slogan and then try and retrofit the evidence to that. Start with the evidence and work from there. I think the context is really important as well. So I noticed there was a question about being half right and half wrong, and Miles and Justine talked about the importance of being specific with your claims, and I think that's absolutely right. You do need to be specific, but you also need to think about the overall context, because if you cherry pick and focus in on one very narrow aspect of your business, and we've seen that in some of the recent ASA decisions, then you risk misleading by getting consumers to focus on something that doesn't really matter when the bigger picture is much more concerning. And then the last thing I would say, which follows on from that, is again something that's already been mentioned: find out what your customers actually think. Now, there's some great research out there. Miles talked about the various bits of work that the ASA have done. For big businesses, you can often go out and spend time doing that consumer research. But even for small businesses, I think sitting down and talking to some of your customers about what they understand from the work that you're doing and the claims that you're making can be really helpful to make sure that you're not misleading them down the line.
Thank you very much for that. Well, let's go to the small business expert. So, Paul, it's often said that small businesses are the lifeblood of green transition. We need them. We need them for everything. But how do we avoid them feeling so like the risk heaped on them, and that in giving them so much to do that they avoid making green claims or green play altogether?
It's a really difficult question, but it's desperately important. And it's worth emphasizing the majority of small businesses believe there is a climate crisis. They desperately want to get this right. But we also know that when confronted with regulation, and we did a study of regulatory changes during COVID, what we learned was that if small businesses are uncertain where the regulatory boundaries are, they tend to over-comply, gold play, or just try and avoid the problem because, frankly, they're fearful of being subjected to regulatory enforcement action. And I think the principles that are out there are good. So we like the CMA's Green Code. I like a lot of the stuff that the ASA puts out there. But what small businesses want, going beyond principles, is confidence that what they're planning to do will be compliant. I think illustrations can be helpful of what falls one side of the line or another side of the line, and the ability to check that what they're planning wouldn't result in punishment. And I think lastly, because there is a lot of strong feeling on this, both amongst the small business community and amongst consumers, citizens more broadly, it's important that innocent mistakes aren't unduly punished, because that will scare small businesses away from trying to communicate what they're doing in this space. And ultimately, as Guy said, that's what we want them to be able to do.
And just for clarity, just tell us what is lost if we don't get small businesses talking and acting on decarbonisation and the net zero agenda. Like, what do they bring to the table?
Well, so, I mean, if they're not acting on the net zero agenda, and they are, the good news is that they are, then obviously that's 5.5 million out of 5.6 million businesses that aren't progressing on the transition, and we're going to lose that diversity in the business population, which would just be a desperate shame. And if they're not talking about it, then it's very difficult for their customers to make an informed choice to go for a small business. And the risk, of course, is that you go for a very well-resourced large business who's been able to put a huge amount of time and money into consumer research to get their advertising claims absolutely right. But that can't be the answer either. So I think you lose a great deal if consumers can't choose the small businesses based on what they're doing in terms of their work on sustainability.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of people recently in the net zero conversation talk about how important the diversity of businesses is in this space. We've seen political headwinds recently, quite a few pot shots taken at net zero, and the business community was able to come together. But, it doesn't take much for some of those big players to be removed from pressures from investors, all the rest of it. So yeah, that diversity is very, very important to the entire net zero agenda. So Harriet, we're inevitably moving into a conversation about green hush, which I do really want to get to. So let's just kick us off and be straightforward here. Why is it important that companies don't green hush and do make green claims?
Well, it is so important. We looked at the fact that consumers, citizens trust brands. We looked at we're here because we know that advertising is an incredibly powerful kind of persuasive device. And as Guy said, we've got this gap between kind of consumer, citizen intention and behaviour when it comes to things, when it comes to things to do with climate. And so what we really, really need, and we've talked a little bit about how confused people feel about, what they're supposed to do. I think there was a YouGov poll from last year that suggested that 47% of the British public are so confused they don't know what to do around things like climate change. So we can have an incredibly powerful role because we have these tools at our disposal to not only frame things in ways that people understand, and the getting rid of these, kind of these woolly terms that are poorly understood and don't really mean anything is actually a fantastic first step in order to kind of dismantling the way that we're actually talking about these issues, and to kind of looking forward to a way where we can actually do this precisely, we can do this compellingly, and we can use the tools at our disposal to help people make better choices. And there's already some brilliant examples of that, out there in the wild. We've seen things such as the Love Island and eBay kind of tie up, which really, kind of brought this idea of, kind of buying secondhand to a different audience. We've got the French government at the moment who are advertising, that people actually choose to repair or to, kind of look at refurbished items as well. So we're already seeing this kind of taking place, and I think it's so important that we start to rethink, walk a mile in the shoes of our customer, as it's been said, and think about how can I break these issues down and how can I talk to them on their own terms. And I think all of those will take us to a much more exciting place and a creative place, and a place where people feel heard and people don't feel confused anymore.
So you mentioned the eBay Love Island thing, which I also really liked because, I'm sure most people would know this, but before that there was just a sort of litany of fast fashion advertising. You sort of pummeled with fast fashion during every ad break, and all the contestants wore fast fashion, and then it just completely flipped the next season. You tuned in and it was, and don't pretend you don't watch it, everyone watches it. Do you know why that happened? Like what is your feeling about how that relates to what we're talking about? Was it simply just a pressure thing, or was it an opportunity? What's your insight?
My insight, okay. Well, I think that there's brilliant people throughout places like, kind of ITV, for example, who are thinking about these things and who are thinking about the norms that we display. When we banned smoking advertising, for example, we also eventually phased out smoking appearing on screen. And we know that, that those kind of complete bans have an impact on people's behavior. And the same thing comes to pass with nudging people to make more sustainable choices. So I imagine there's lots of good people thinking about these kind of things. And I also imagine that actually, if we walk a mile in the shoes of our consumer, we've got a cost of living crisis. We've got people who would like to be able to afford nice things, but unfortunately, that have to pay huge bills. And so I imagine there was a sense of people of actually from the consumer of going, well, I would like these things. I haven't got as much money to pay for them, anymore. And this feels like a good way to do that. And probably to make some money for myself from selling my old things. So, from a push perspective, we can see that, but we can also see it from a kind of human and personal perspective, taking into account everything that's going on right now in the world. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm always interested in that story. Cecilia, we just talked about, we just mentioned the idea of complete bans. This is a question that's come in. Have there been any thoughts on advocating for greenwashing to be added to the list of banned or blacklisted commercial practices? And this is from Bill, and he says it's something that we at Consumer Scotland have advocated for in relation to the DMCC, which I imagine Digital Markets Bill. What's your view on that?
Yeah, there has been work done. So initially back in I think it was March 2022, the CMA gave some advice to government, which you mentioned in my bio about the relationship between the consumer protection framework and sustainability. And among a number of things we recommended, one of them was looking at adding greenwashing or unsubstantiated green claims to the list of banned practices. We've since submitted a further steer to government on that as part of the consideration for the Digital Markets and Competition and Consumer Bill, which is going through at the moment. I think I'm right in saying that it wouldn't necessarily be on the face of the bill itself, but the government is taking the power to add matters to the banned practice list, which will potentially cover a whole host of things that we don't particularly like. But misleading environmental claims and unsubstantiated environmental claims is certainly something that we're recommending that they think about adding to that list.
Great, thank you so much. I just want to ask a few questions more about the nature of the complaints that you've already acted on and what we can learn from those. So Guy, what sort of cases, we heard about your long history, even longer than I thought, in regulation and green claims. What sort of cases have you pursued so far that sort of stand out, and what can we kind of learn from any of those? Do you have an example you can give us?
Yeah, I do. I mean, there have been quite a lot of them, quite a lot of investigations and published rulings in this space, particularly in the last couple of years as we've really focused on it. There's been a high-profile one in the banking sector against HSBC a couple of years ago, which was the first case that we, and I think any other ad regulator in the world, took on the issue of misleading by omission. It was a campaign by HSBC focused on their sustainable investments with sort of green imagery featuring in the ads. And we looked into it and we ended up banning it because we thought it downplayed the still very substantial investments that HSBC made at the time, and I think still make, into very high carbon emitting businesses and sectors. And going back to the point that's already been made a couple of times on this call about people's high aspirations for behaving in a sustainable way, but their relatively low knowledge of terms and what that means and how it all works. We thought this was dangerous because we thought the average person that saw that campaign would think HSBC were a lot further along the journey than they were. Now, that doesn't mean that a business like HSBC can't talk about their more sustainable investments and more sustainable initiatives. It does mean that if you're a high emitting business for whatever reason, oil and gas company, or a high carbon transport, or a bank that invests lots in these areas, it does mean that you've got to add balance to those sorts of ad campaigns, and you need to acknowledge the other side of the story. And you can do this, and there's a good example of a very big oil company that did it before our HSBC ruling. About a year before, they ran a campaign where they were talking about their investment in carbon capture and hydrogen, and they ran this campaign in the national press, I think perhaps amongst other media, and they acknowledged in the ad that although most of our investments are although most of our activity is oil and gas extraction, we are focused on transitioning, and this is what we're doing. They made it clear in the ad that there's quite an important other side to the story here, so you can do it. Lots of rulings in the food and drink area, lots of businesses making green claims in that area, so quite a lot there. Rulings against UK water companies, other oil and gas. There was a very high profile ruling against Shell and a couple of other oil and gas companies. So there's been a lot of activity by us in this area, and I think it's true to say what Donna said earlier. I think we are in the global lead of regulating green claims, and it's important that we stay there.
Which companies did you consult with when you were setting up your standards?
Well, the formal guidance that we produce, we've got guidance on green claims, a new edition of which we published in the summer. That is produced by CAP, and CAP is an industry board that is made up of representatives from all the big trade associations and professional bodies that represent the advertising industry in the UK. So that's kind of built in to the governance of the ASA system when it comes to code rules and guidance. Most of the activity in the green space has been around guidance because the rules that we've had for a long time are fit for purpose. But of course, times move on and we need new guidance to address the specific issues of today.
Okay, thank you. Cecilia, I can't help noticing, because I'm a bit obsessed with the fashion and textiles world, that the CMA had quite a few cases from the fashion industry, from fashion brands. maybe you could talk a little bit about those and why were they, am I right in suggesting that they were a bit of a test case for greenwash claims?
Yeah, so unlike the ASA, the CMA is relatively new to the world of greenwashing claims. We launched the Green Claims Code in September 2021, and when we did that, we announced we would follow up with a look at how people were complying. We picked the fashion industry as the first place to look. Partly because it is such a massive contributor to emissions. It's something that people in Britain spend a lot of money on annually. The waste figures for how much ends up in landfill is pretty atrocious when it comes to the fashion sector. So yeah, we then, having done a review of the sector, opened investigations into ASOS, Boohoo and ASDA. Those investigations are still ongoing, so I can't say too much about them, but I mean, generally what we observed in the fashion industry was lots of green claims being made. I think uncertainty about what impact the products that were purported to be better for the environment were actually having on the environment. And generally, of course, in that sector, you're seeing a lot of a push for people to buy new stuff all of the time, which in itself isn't the greatest advert for sustainability.
So what is the time frame on claims? Do you try and adjudicate within a certain amount of time?
So we operate a bit differently from the ASA because we're not looking typically at advertising. We're looking at the whole process of commercial practices of selling to consumers. We try and resolve those cases within about 18 months, but we will dig very deeply into the systems and processes that the businesses are operating, looking at the evidence they have to back up the claims that they're making, looking at how they train their staff, looking at their supply chain. So we do a much more detailed review, and then work towards a solution which means consumers get the information that they need when they need it.
Okay, thank you for that. Harriet, I want to come to you and talk to you with your activist hat on, which is probably always on, but Guy mentioned, there have been changes in advertising, and I think you can hear it. I was listening to, was it Times podcast, Stories of Our Times, and there's a BP insert, which it's almost like they've gone through and checked everything. So it's, there's context in the sense that they are saying outright that it's not their primary business and all that kind of stuff. But to lots of people, when you're talking about fossil fuel companies, it's like rearranging the chairs on the Titanic. I mean, and the chairs are on fire. So, I mean, shouldn't we just be saying there is no advertising that we can do for these companies because it is all greenwashing?
Wow. I mean, yes.
Well, it's a question that gets asked. Is it a terrible question? I think we should.
No, I don't think it's a terrible question at all. I think it's actually one of the biggest questions that we've got to reckon with as an industry, right? Because we are effectively creating disinformation on behalf of our clients in some cases, and that is, that's an existential problem for the advertising industry. We talk about kind of like all of the good that we want to do, and I think being on the side of the angels, absolutely, but we are also not on the side of the angels, frankly. And so with these, certainly what we encourage organizations and people to do is to be able to interrogate the briefs that they're being given, and to be able to go, does this fit? Basically, does this fit with the Paris kind of climate agreement? And if it doesn't, then it's my personal opinion that we shouldn't be doing this, because, as we said, advertising is an incredibly powerful tool. And it not only does it have the propensity to change behavior, but it also has the propensity to kind of change how susceptible we are to things. And that includes, kind of messages from some of these organizations that say, we're doing X, we're socially acceptable. And in the same way that, we don't consider, we no longer believe adverts when we're showing them that say, my doctor recommends that we smoke this. Should we we're still looking at some of these organisations and thinking, oh, they're all right, you know, they've got some renewable energy kind of things going on. And I think it gets to the real heart of you know, certainly the advertising community, what we should be asking ourselves and why. Yeah.
Well, I'm not asking you to solve this right now, but if you're looking at the 1.5, the Paris regime, Paris trajectory, I mean, I'm just thinking of some research that Polestar, the electric vehicle brand, did, where they actually published literally all the life cycle of every component. And their conclusion from all their work is that I think you know, the whole automotive industry is 75% off targets. I mean, it would basically screen out most industries, and then we have an issue.
The science is unmovable, and the science is really, really clear about what we need to do, which is decarbonize. And and I think that is why it's brilliant to see this kind of pressure being applied and this kind of rigor being applied to the claims that are out there. I think we do need to go. We need to go further, faster on a lot of these things. And I think that, I think it's very, very important that we hold the science up as the absolute thing that we're aiming towards, and the absolute thing that we've got to use as our compass about whether something's right or not.
We've got an interesting suggestion from someone. How easy or difficult would it be to introduce an official disclaimer to ads with green claims, warning consumers just to be circumspect and directing them to a website where they can discover more about potentially misleading environmental claims? Think Gamble Aware, for example, which would sort of be, I mean, I guess a slight admission of defeat, but it would say, look, there's probably something a bit suspect about this, but you know, it's just a suggestion. Maybe we can come back to that. Paul, I'm just going to come to you, because obviously small companies can also be on the side of devils or angels. So, you know, there are high carbon small companies as well. And I wanted to just start coming back to a point that you made earlier, which is about overburdening small companies. So increasingly, I think everyone's talking about precision, and a couple of people have mentioned life cycle analysis, which, you know, to an extent, the better your life cycle analysis, if you're working with big research institution and you've got 9 PhDs working on your supply chain, you can probably make some claims with a certain amount of impunity. For small businesses, that is a resource that maybe they won't have. So comment on that and what is available to them.
Yeah, so I think some of the points that others have made about the need to be specific is quite helpful with the claim, because that then does allow the small business to hone in on something that they're doing and hopefully describe that accurately, and therefore be compliant and be helping their customers make an informed choice. But to be honest, there are a couple of big things that I think we need to crack more broadly in order to help small businesses get this right. And the biggest one is probably around carbon measurement, because only 1 in 10 small businesses knows how to measure their carbon emissions. And of course, small businesses have nowhere near the influence or leverage over their supply chain as a big business does. So getting at that information as to how the bits that they're using to make their product have been sourced can be more difficult for a small business. So I think if you can do something to standardize and make it easier for small businesses to measure, that would go a long way to help them to be able to have the evidence that would then support the claims that they subsequently may choose to make, which I know is going back a long way in the process, but I think that's actually really, really vital to them taking the action and then being able to talk well about it.
And some people would say, well, that should have been done really as part of the net zero agenda anyway. You know,
yeah, well, I think that's right. It is just a big part of helping small businesses understand what their emissions are and manage them more effectively. Like, I was amazed that only around a quarter of small businesses actually have a smart meter, which is, you know, just such a simple way to understand your energy use and manage your costs, as well as, you know, your carbon content. So I would totally agree with that reflection.
Can I come in on that, Lucy?
Yes, please. I was going to ask you anyway.
Thank you. No, I think Paul's right. I think greater standardization around terms and measures is a part of the answer, and DESNet and other government agencies are on the case. It doesn't have to be legislated for, but it needs to be kind of officially backed so everyone can use it as their North Star and have an easier time of it, working out what to do and what offsetting means and how much of a contribution it makes and what type of offsetting, as well as the measurement of carbon. Just going to another point that Paul just covered around the full life cycle analysis, which of course is incredibly demanding to undertake. You don't have to make a claim, whether you're a small business or a big business, you do not have to make a claim that triggers the evidential requirement of conducting a full life cycle analysis. You know, other claims are available, and actually picking up on something Harriet said about, or might have been Cecilia actually said about, look, start with what you're doing and what you can show. Don't start with a big bold claim and then try and retrofit the evidence to fit it. That is the best way through it, and it doesn't mean that the output of this thinking, your ads, are going to be uncreative and full of T's and C's and qualifications. It does not have to be like that. The UK ad agency is fantastic and creative, and they can turn your benefit, even if it is quite precise and narrow because you're quite early in the start of your journey, big business or small, it can turn that into a compelling ad if you do it right. And the compelling ad with claims that you can support is more likely to be believed and appreciated by your audience.
Has anyone got an ad or an example that they think is good? Are you allowed to cherry pick? I don't know if that's like having favorite children or something. Maybe we can. Has anyone got like a good example? Because I'm sort of thinking, if I had a small business, which I sort of do, but I don't, it's not the same for me, but, and I'm maybe not that confident with the language. I know that I can't now use things like planet friendly because that's not specific enough. I don't have life cycle analysis. Where would I go for my inspo, I guess? That's what I'm sort of slightly struggling with. But we can come back to that if anyone has any ideas.
I think you should go to what you're doing. What are you as a business doing that you're proud of and that you think is contributing to a more rather than a less sustainable future? And then find a good way of telling that story to your customers in an engaging way. And get help from communication specialists if you can afford it, but just doing that, just following that process of starting with the thing that you're proud of, that you think is good, that you are doing, and building up from there, and then turning it into an attractive, compelling proposition is a good place to start.
If I could come in on that one, actually, because I think that's absolutely right and good advice. But what small businesses would also find reassuring is being able to go on ASA website, CMA website, and see examples of what you thought fitted well within the rules, and they can then be inspired by those and think, right, how can I do something that's along the same lines as that? And another point I would make is there is tons of good guidance on ASA website, but some of it, and I'm thinking of e-learning here, is behind a paywall. So a small business would have to pay in order to get on that. And that is a big deterrent then when it's a regulatory thing they need to be compliant with. And I know obviously you'll make as much of it available as you can, but just encourage anything that helps small businesses get this right to not be put behind a paywall, because I think then that will lead them towards just not engaging with green claims, not doing it.
Thank you for your direct lobbying. We see now why you are such a revered policy man. Right. I've got a couple more questions, if that's okay, just around like how this actually works. And I just wanted to, Cecilia, I just wanted to ask you a little bit about complaints. Is there a danger, or maybe Guy, this is more for you, is there a danger that we could get overwhelmed by complaints, or you could get overwhelmed by complaints? And when I've been asked to report on cases in the past, I found the rulings, it's all quite straightforward. It's usually because they've overclaimed and not been precise enough, usually. But there was also a suspicion, certainly in one of them, that the industry, which was about analog meats, that the other side of that industry, real meats, had been lobbying or complaining, in force. So how do you sort of screen out commercial rivals, all that sort of thing? How do you keep it sort of clean and pure?
We look at the message of the ad and the context and the audience and the rules and any associated guidance, and we try and not be too distracted by the motivation of the person or the business that's complaining. You know, you may have a strong competitive interest. You may be a very forthright campaigner, and you may also be right that the advertising that you've spotted is misleading. The two are not incompatible. In terms of dealing with large volumes of complaints, we get about 35,000 complaints a year, roughly, about everything, not just about green claims. We obviously have very sophisticated triage processes to determine how we assess and pursue those complaints. We cannot throw a full investigation at every single one of them. It's impossible. We have to prioritize. I am perfectly confident that numbers of complaints is not going to be a problem for us, because we are good at prioritizing. The challenge actually for us, which I touched on earlier, was how do we see what's out there online, particularly, that people aren't complaining about, and that's where our AI system comes in. That is a bigger challenge for us than working out what to do with the complaints that we get from real people.
Okay, Cecilia, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just, first of all, just endorse that last point with Guy. I mean, we the Competition and Markets Authority has been around for almost 10 years now, but we're still not a terribly well recognized brand. And unlike our predecessor, we don't have a sort of a direct consumer complaints function. So actually, a lot of the time we are out looking for intelligence to try and figure out where we can make the biggest impact, and the volume of complaints that we receive isn't necessarily an indicator of where we end up prioritizing our activities, although occasionally it will happen during the COVID pandemic. The number of complaints we were receiving about particular areas was a driver, but often that's not the case, and we're going out and looking for that intelligence. We actually see, I think, getting complaints from competitors as a bonus. I mean, one of the things that we are trying to do with our Green Claims Code, and indeed with all our work, is to level the playing field. Businesses who are trying to do the right thing and who are selling genuinely better products ought not to be disadvantaged by those that are opting for spending their budget on marketing rather than on improving their performance. So you know, from our point of view, if we do get complaints from other businesses, we will look at them seriously, because we want those businesses that are doing the right thing to thrive.
Okay, thank you for that. And we've had a few questions on this agreed set of terminology that seems to be missing, and we've heard that throughout this session this morning. I'm also sort of conscious that I think this is from an ASA briefing. There are currently no fixed definitions for carbon neutrality or net zero. Have we bypassed forming a green taxonomy? I know that's really painful to do, as we've seen from the EU. And how do we retrofit if we're missing this information? Harriet, do you have any thoughts on that? And then I'll come to you, Paul.
I mean, I have, yeah, okay. So there are some, whilst, you know, kind of, if they're not in this round of guidance, then there are, you know, things out there that people should be looking at. And I think there's some very clear guidance from an organisation called the Climate Action Against Disinformation Coalition, which looks at different forms of kind of climate misinformation. And like, you know, you've got your classic, you know, kind of climate change is a hoax. You've got kind of cherry picking and misrepresentation of science. And you can see that many of the ASA rulings have leaned into this misrepresentation of activities or spotlighting. You've got, you know, you can see that. And then the third one is false solutionism. So presenting something that is as a solution that is not, you know, does not have the evidence to back that up. And so I think that we can start to think, you know, we can start to think more broadly about these things. We can start to lean on information that's already out there. But I think I would come down to this fact of asking yourself, why do you want to use the term carbon neutral? Really, because it is, you know, it is woolly, it is poorly understood. It is like, we're just getting, you know, I think I would chuck it in the bin and start again would be my advice, because most people, like we do, you know, we do research every year where we go around and we talk to people around the country about where they are on, you know, in their lives, but also, you know, where they are in terms of climate change. And people say to us, I just want it broken down like a 5-year-old. I just want that lesson like a 5-year-old so that I can understand what this is I'm talking about. We saw that in the research from earlier on. People just want to understand. So my advice would be, let's not talk about that. Let's talk about how we can help people to connect with what we're trying to say.
Very good advice. I like the putting things in the bin. I think that's very good. Paul, did you have any thoughts about that sort of, where do we need a taxonomy? Have we sort of missed that boat? How do we retrofit it?
So just to say that a lot of the issues that are coming up in the consumer research that's been spoken about are replicated in the conversations that I have with small businesses. You know, they find a lot of the terminology confusing when they're thinking about what they should buy, either in their personal or their business lives. And so I think there would be some value in some degree of taxonomy or some confirmation of which terms are less likely to mislead. And I think small businesses would find that somewhat reassuring when making purchasing decisions themselves as well.
Okay, thank you. We've got a sort of a longer to-do list, I think, after this conversation, which is all very good. Just to finish off with, we've heard, I can't remember who brought this into the conversation, but this, I think, Harriet, this existential crisis in advertising, especially around some of these issues around whether oil and gas should be allowed to advertise and all that kind of stuff. Guy, how would you characterize the state of the industry in relation to its connection to the environment at this point? And, you know, are you optimistic or pessimistic?
I think it's nearer the start of the journey than the end, but I think there's a lot of goodwill behind making sure that the contribution of UK advertising to the climate debate is more of a positive one than a negative one. So I'm quite optimistic, actually, but I think there is a lot of work to do.
Okay.
You know, we've talked about green claims. We haven't really talked about the anti-consumption agenda and the contribution that advertising makes to driving consumption quite as much. But that is a big issue too, and it's becoming more mainstream.
Maybe we'll do another panel on that because it is very, very important. Cecilia, just to get your thoughts, then Harriet, then Paul, and then we'll hand back to Donna.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with them, with Guy, particularly on the anti-consumption agenda. But right now, I think our consumer protection framework is about helping people buy stuff rather than stopping them buy stuff. And so I think there's a much bigger debate to be had about what the kind of role of the consumer protection agenda is in relation to that. I mean, I think the key thing for businesses right now is to share what they can in terms of what they're doing, but make sure that that's backed up by evidence. I think increasingly we will see regulation trending towards requiring disclosures. And so if you start telling people the whole story right now, even if it's telling them the bad along with the good, then you're going to be well placed when that does come down the line. Thank you. Harriet?
Sorry, Lisa, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, optimistic or pessimistic about where we are now? As brief as you like.
Brief as you like, right. Realistic. You know, we know where we need to go. We know what we need to do to get there. We've got some tough questions to ask ourselves. This is brilliant and it's a step on the way, but let's ask ourselves these questions quickly, because otherwise, you know, kind of like regulation and risk is coming for us.
Thank you, Paul.
I'm optimistic. Small businesses are incredibly innovative and good at changing, and it's just essential that we get this right. So they will. So the sooner that we can give them the clarity they need, I think they'll react really well to it.
Thank you. Thank you to our audience for engaging as well, and all the brilliant questions. Wish we had time for more. Donna, I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to all of our speakers this morning. I do want to say a big thank you to all of my ASA colleagues who've been involved in the organisation of this event and have been working behind the scenes to make sure everything's gone smoothly this morning. Our new strategy and the research report are now live on the ASA website, but we will send a follow-up email to everyone with all the details and the links, so you'll have those to hand. And apologies we weren't able to get to everybody's question, but if you have a burning issue you want to raise with us, then we'll include our general email address in that email for you to get back in touch with us. So I think that just leaves me to thank you all for joining us, and I do hope you've enjoyed this morning's session as much as I have. Thank you very much.